welcome to Let's Talk Money, Secrets for Financial Success. And this is part of our Let's Talk Money series. We're kind of moving on down in our scenario here. And I'm Kathy Swedler. I work with University of Illinois Extension as a consumer economics educator, and I work out of the Champaign, Ford, Iroquois, and Vermilion counties. Seisha, would you like to introduce yourself, please? Whoops, I'm not hearing you, Seisha. Could you be on mute?
That's because we have two mutant buttons because of these fancy microphones we have. But my name is Seisha Grobbenstetter, and I'm also a consumer economics educator, but I'm housed up in Grundy, Kankakee, and Will counties. Kamaya?
Hello, everyone. My name is Kamaya Walls-Bichard. I share the same title as Kathy and Seisha. I'm in Livingston, McLean, and Woodford counties. So happy to have you all on tonight.
Wonderful, thank you. And we're also joined by Emily and Brooke. You may see them sharing information in the chat, who work with us as program coordinators and help make this web series possible. All right, so let's kind of get warmed up here. So I'm not the only one contributing, and I'd like to hear from you all in the chat. What's the one thing you're not willing to buy cheap? I think there's always something that we just don't want to keep mustard. Okay, that's a great one. If you don't have your chat open, now's a good time to open it up so you can type in there. It usually looks like a little bubble. Could be hiding under your more, the three little dots. Cheese, I'm seeing. Shoes, I agree. Furnaces, my car, mattress, lots of things that we're not willing to buy cheap. A lot of shoes today. Stethoscopes, okay. Dog food, I've seen that one come up before on this kind of presentation. So great. Thank you for all your feedback, and you can keep adding in there to things that come to mind. I see tea. Coffee is an important one to me, not to buy cheap. And I think it's important, it seems like a little bit of a random question maybe, but as we go through today's presentation and we're talking about things that make our finances successful, I do think it's important to think about what matters to us, what are we not willing to buy cheap, where do we feel like we can cut back, so it all fits into the overall picture. Okay, so what are we talking about today? Because really the title didn't tell you too much, but what we're going to do is really take a look at the things that I think, and the research supports, that makes a difference in our financial well-being and our financial success. And so we're going to talk about knowing your financial goals and where you want to go. And how to be conscious, mindful of your spending decisions. And then we're also going to take a look at, just quickly, and keep in mind how to balance short-term and long-term goals, why it's important to comparison shop, and then talk a little bit about asking for help with your finances as well. So some of these things we'll do more of a deep dive into, some of them we'll just touch on, but I do think these are all really important things when it comes to financial success. Now, just to help us kind of get an idea of who we're talking to, and maybe that even will make my examples a little better, I'm curious, who's on tonight and what is your age, if you don't mind sharing that. Your answers will be anonymous, but it does give us some great feedback. So we'll appreciate all these fast answers. And yes, of course, if you don't want to use the poll, you can put it in the chat. So thank you there. All right, any other answers? So we can give this one, two, just a couple seconds here as people. All right, I'm going to end that polling, and I'll go ahead and share these results because I always think it's kind of interesting. We've got a good distribution here, kind of leaning towards younger maybe than some other nights. So nice, thank you. Okay, so thanks for that participation. One more question I have for you. This is, you thought I was going to be doing all the work, but no, I'm making you do the work. What county are you logging in from today? I know I saw somebody was from Colorado, I think, earlier. It was in the chat. Will County, Champaign, Cook, McDonald, Kankakee, Piatt. Oh, nice distribution here. Vermilion, Iowa, that Peoria, McLean, Tazewell. All right. Anybody from out of state or out of the country? All over the place. Colorado, welcome. Great. All right, so what I want to start with is thinking about financial goals. And I really feel like that when we're talking about financial goals, we need to start out by dreaming big. That's been my philosophy in life. But to think about it from a perspective of not just what do we want now, but where do you want to be down the road? And I think it's really important to find a place and time where you can do this kind of dreaming, because we tend to get very caught up in day-to-day things, whether we're talking about finances or you're thinking about something else. You know, you're working on things like laundry and getting food on the table and getting your job taken care of. But where do we dream? So give yourself some time to dream and think about where do you want to be down the road. And what I really encourage is that you actually draw a picture of where you want to be. It's okay to write words in there too, but sometimes it's actually easier to illustrate things to really kind of help you do that dreaming. And these are some examples of dreams that people who have taken a course called Financial Planning for Young Adults have posted on social media. And so just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, maybe, later this week you can, take some space and sit out in the sun and do some dreaming. Yes, like a vision board, great example. If you're interested in this course, just so you know about it, this is a course that's from University of Illinois called Financial Planning for Young Adults. It's a relatively short course. It's free. And I should say, disclaimer, I am one of the instructors, but so is Dr. Nicholas Paulson and Dr. Chaffin from Certified Financial Planning Board. So good course if you're looking for some more information. Okay, so once you've done some dreaming, then I think it's also important to sit back and take those dreams and make them into SMART goals. And so that we have a way to take these very big dreams and make them specific. So that we have, once they're specific, we can start thinking about how do we measure if we're making progress on those goals? Are they agreed upon? Are they realistic? And then they are timed. And so to look at that a little bit more, measurable really can be, are you saving money towards something? Are you getting the action steps that you need to get done to meet that goal done? Agreed upon can also relate to, if you share finances or plans with somebody else, then, talking to them about it. Are you in the same place on your goals, or do they think you're working towards one goal and you think you're working towards another? That can be problematic. It's good to communicate about it. I really think that setting a date can help you work towards that goal. I'm one of those people where I need deadlines. I need to have an idea of when is my target date that I want something accomplished. And once you have all these pieces in, then you can start looking at whether it is realistic or not. And so let's just take a look at a couple of examples so that I can explain this realistic point. What if somebody said that they wanted to build an emergency savings and they figured they had a year to do it, and they thought $1,200 seemed like a reasonable amount for them to put towards emergency savings? Well, a year, $1,200, 12 months in a year, that would be $100 a month. To me, $100 in a month, or maybe even think of it as $25 a week, is much easier for me to decide, is that a realistic amount, than to say, oh, within a year, I need $1,200. With $25 a week, I can think about what behaviors would I change? Do I need to work more or cut out something? I can even monitor it. And after a month or two, I can look and see to say, do I have that much money, $200, let's say, in 2 months in a savings account? If not, then what do I need to do to adjust my goal? Either, maybe it was too ambitious and I need to back off, or maybe I need to really take a serious look at what's important to me. Sometimes goals don't have dollars around them, and that makes sense. For example, checking your credit report, something we talked about, I think it was last week, that might, be a goal that you would want to write down. Keep in mind that if you have any questions as we go along, that Kamaya and Seisha are standing by, ready to answer your questions in the chat. So put them in there as we go. You don't need to wait until we're done with the presentation or anything. So I really do want to kind of encourage you strongly to think about writing a personal financial SMART goal for yourself. You might want to write now, just sort of jot it down real quickly, or maybe you have something in mind that you want to put out in the chat to let everybody know, to kind of say it and then you're committed to it. There's a piece to it. So anyway, think about what would be the SMART goal that would fit for you right now in your life. And while you're thinking about that, think also about what is important to you. What are your values that are your high priority values? And different people have different values, and that's fine, of course. But I think it's important to be really conscious of what yours are so that you can look at whether your values are matching with your financial decisions. So if you, for example, really value friendships, are you putting your resources, whether they're dollars or time or energy, into your friendships? Or if it's education, how are your financial decisions supporting that value? So these are things to sometimes to think about as we kind of go through our own consciousness raising about what is important to you and what are your goals, both in terms of values and where you want to be down the road. All right, so we're not going to spend too much time today talking about values because we talked a lot about it in our first webinar in this series, Who Are You with Money? And that was recorded, and you can listen to it if you if you missed it or you want to review it. And thank you, Brooke, for putting that up into the chat. So let's now kind of segue over to talking about building a spending plan or a budget. And the reason that I think that this is an important part of financial success is that a spending plan can help you be more conscious of your money, and it can help with self-control. And so those are the things that may have value to you, and you may want to consider incorporating building a spending plan into your own life. So we've already talked about steps 1 and 2, knowing what's important to you, your values, setting your financial goals. And now we're going to move on and talk about steps 3 and 4 and 5. So income and expenses, how to actually create this thing, and then how to evaluate it. And again, as I was saying, really being conscious of our spending decisions is probably one of the most key and important parts of a spending plan. And for me, it really helps to be mindful of my financial decisions when I have a plan of where I'm trying to go, and I know that plan is matching my goals. And being mindful of it helps me stay on track with things. And one of the strategies that I feel like really helps, it's very, what I want to say, kind of, it's not rocket science, it's just sort of basic, but it makes a difference. And I'm not saying it's fun always, but it does make a difference. And that is tracking your expenses and tracking your income. So knowing where your dollars are going and what dollars are coming in is really, I think, the key piece of a spending plan. So before we get too far into that, I just had a quick poll to do. And what I wanted to know is how much, have you ever really tracked expenses before where you've kept track, maybe to the dollar or the quarter, where your money goes? So this is just, again, it's anonymous, so it's not, having to say anything about you, but I'm just curious. All right, we're getting in the votes here. Seeing it go. Lots of participation tonight. That's so much fun for me. Thank you. All right, looks like we've got the votes. So I'm going to end the poll and I'll share this. So we've got a good mix here. We have quite a few people that regularly track their expenses, but we also have people who've been in the other, never tracked them, maybe tried it at one time type thing. So great, thank you very much. All right, let's talk a little bit more about this tracking expenses thing. All right, so I kind of threw that out, the idea that you track expenses, but how do you do it? What's a good way to do it? It looks like Seisha says that she uses an app. How about other people, if you would put into chat, what tools or ways have you either done or heard about it before? Somebody says they've used an app called Mint. Others like Excel or spreadsheets that are paper and pen work fine. I track expenses, but not random spending. I might need to know a little bit more about that, Shelley. Notebook, a virtual wallet via PNC. So yes, a lot of times a particular bank or credit union will have their own app or website. There's a shout out for Alabama Money Management Calendar. QuickBooks. Okay, so lots of different ways to do it. Some ways where they're on the website or an app, you can actually connect it to your credit card or your debit card so that when you do it somewhere, when you use that tool to buy gas or food, it'll automatically go into the category for you. And others, you need to enter the information manually. And it kind of depends on your style, what you like best. There is definitely not a right or a wrong here, but more just a style thing for you to experiment or try to find one to see if it works for you. Trying to see if anything, I think we covered all these different methods in the chat, so that's fantastic. We don't really have to spend any more time on it, but if you haven't done it before, I have to say that honestly, if you're looking at making changes in your financial life and that's important to you, then I think tracking expenses is one of the most important strategies that you can do to become more mindful of your financial decision-making and spending. It's not always about finding things that you can cut money back or that you're spending too much in. Sometimes it's just to give you good data so that you know where your money is going. So once you have this data, and I think you do need to collect it for about a month or more to really get a good sense of it, then you're going to be able to start building a monthly spending plan. So if you could see in this slide, in the first column under the blue arrow, this is where the track spending for the first month would go. So everything that you had spent would go into these different categories. And then the next, once you've tracked your expenses for a month, you can look at those categories and think to yourself, does these seem like what I expect to spend in this category, or was this month particularly high or low for whatever reason? And then that allows you to plan your spending for month 2. Then during month 2, you're going to track your spending again, and you're going to compare it at the end of the month to your planned spending. And this is a working document. It's going to take a little while before you get it where it really flows easily for you. But the process of planning your spending, tracking it, and then comparing it will give you really great information about your cash flow. And from there, then you will have a spending plan that will work for you. And this is just another example. Sometimes we do budgets by month, sometimes by year, sometimes by paycheck. Either way can work just fine. Just depends on what works best for you. All right, I'm going to take a little break here and turn this over to Kamaya and let her talk about some of the challenges of working with the spending plan.
Thank you, Kathy. So, when we think about like our spending plan and, there are certain things that, of course, that are definitely and will always be on our budget, on our spending plan. But there's some things that get overlooked. So we want to spend a little more time tonight on occasional expenses because they often get overlooked. So when we think of occasional or seasonal expenses, these are expenses that occur at specific time in the year. And again, it's easy to forget about them because we don't often, they don't often occur and we don't pay a lot of attention to them. So it might be different than some of our other expenses that are from month to month and we know what's coming up and we can anticipate that quite easily. But nonetheless, like these dollar amounts from our occasional spending become very important to our spending plan. They become very important because they have an impact. They have an effect on how we spend and how we save. So this is why we wanted to spend a little bit of time on these. And it's easy, of course, to forget about them. We might think that, that's month away. I don't have to think about that right now. Or maybe your financial situation has changed and there's some anxiety around like what's going on. But whatever the reason, we want to shine kind of like a spotlight on this because it's important to manage these seasonal expenses. And we have a few examples that, of course, I going to share. But before that, I have another question for you, and you can share your answers in the chat with us. So on the next slide, we would like you to share some examples of occasional expenses that are in your life. What are some things that you don't pay for month to month, but they might come up, every few months? So I see life insurance on here. You have that set up that way. Kids clothes, so it might be around school, back to school time that you shop for school supplies and shop for clothes. I see gifts, Christmas, property taxes, license plate stickers. That one always gets me. So now I have a plan to make sure that I renew my tabs. Lawn care, zoo passes. Yes, Seisha. So yes, there's lots of different things. Thank you for sharing these. So even if we don't get to read yours, remember we value like your feedback and we use this information. So thank you for sharing those. So yes, these are some really good examples of occasional expenses. So thank you for sharing that. So on this slide, this occasional expense tracker is an example from our All My Money curriculum. And this example is just to help us think about like what those might be and to help plan ahead. So some of you have already mentioned what you do pay for like occasional expenses, and you might see some examples on here too. But when we use this example, it lists kind of like the expenses that may come up at different times in a calendar year. So we're using that. How much you might expect to spend. And we also try to incorporate a little bit on like estimates for like any emergencies, because of course those will come up, and just kind of planning ahead for those. So this, of course, all of these, like these different types of occasional expenses, they will not look the same for every household, of course not. And each year, they might slightly be different. So you might not have like a graduation in your family every year or a wedding in your family every year. So these might change like over time. So what I would like you to do though, as we're talking more about this and spending some time on there, is to see again, what would go on your list, on your spending list relating to like occasional expenses. So once you have estimated what that number would be. So this is an example, and we'll of course have some links in the chat for you, but this is an example of how you would go about tracking that monthly and kind of adding up all that amount. And so if you're planning on how am I going to save for this, it's like all these different things. How am I going to save for this? In our example here, we're looking at it by month to month. So each month, so if you're looking at like 12 months and you're trying to estimate how much you would save, you would kind of add up all those amounts and divide that by 12 to get a better understanding of, what should I be saving each month? And that can give you an idea. your financial situation might be different from another person, but tracking it this way just gets you to a place where you're thinking more about it and kind of anticipating what is coming up. So just think about like what that example actually means for you. So yeah, just wanted to share that one. On our next slide, we have an example, which we're going to share a link to in the chat. So something that you can, of course, download on our website and play around with. A lot of like the different tools that we share related to budgeting. We know that they all don't work for everybody, but these are great examples of how you can use like these different type of calendar and piece just to help with tracking those. So this is another example that we share to help you organize like your spending, your expenses. You can track each month. And then once you do that, think about it as having like kind of a record of what you did. So if you get a record of what you did this year to kind of anticipate what are those seasonal, occasional expenses going to look like next year, so that you can, of course, anticipate that for the future. So this again is another example, and Brooke just shared that link in the chat. On our other slide, we just want to talk a little bit more about like income sources, because you may have different income sources. There's some folks who do have one really good paid salary job where you're getting like your wages and it's predictable each month, what's coming in, what's going out. But for a lot of people, we might have volatile income or income that's just not what you would call regular. So this might be different for some households. So, it may come and go, like that income may not be like that stable. So there are different sources that people do have coming in for income. So not just necessarily from like a 9-to-5 job. It could be from side gigs. It could be from government programs that we get benefits from other things like, of course, with like alimony. So different ways in how we might get money. And I always like to say, like, for us as educators, we teach to real people who have real life situations, and we are real people with real life situations. So we know that income sources may vary. So when we teach about spending plan and budgeting, I'm just acknowledging that fact that for a lot of people, they might have like that unpredictable income source. So making sure that you are tracking all those different places that the money is coming from, and having like an account of that so that can help you with like your planning. So just keeping all of that in mind can be extremely useful. All right, on our other slide, again, like your income may vary from month to month, but understanding your income flow will, of course, definitely help with your plan. And in this example, just wanting to focus a little bit more on how when you plan for your money and how you're making that work for you. So it makes sense to sometimes look at what we've done in the past. And I think I mentioned that before, to see, what was my income like last year? And is my situation similar this year? I'm just looking to see where those income sources were and if that's going to work for me this year. So I remember being a college student, and I used to get like banqueting jobs, and when I did like the banquets for this casino, it would call me every few months if they had like a major event, a concert, different things like that. But it wasn't predictable income. It's like one of those things where there might be something going on. They could call somebody else or they could call you. But I would think about like when they would usually call me and seeing how much I would make for that event, and then that could be a part of my budgeting. So for you, looking to see like what your income sources were, and of course keeping a record of that to see how that might contribute to like your overall income. So with that, are there any questions about like this piece? Brooke just shared the track your income link in the chat. Again, all these tools, these wonderful tools that we use for our consumer economics program and our Money Mentors program, is to just help you figure out what you're doing with these, because there are a lot of different ways that you can track your expenses. And we all have our preferences, and some of us might be more willing to experiment more than some, but just figuring out like a tool that you can use that you think makes sense for your situation. All right, I'll hand it back over to Kathy.
Thank you so much, Kamaya. I really appreciate the nice job that you just did on that. And, you know, what we do know is some people really find it rewarding to track expenses and income, and they do it easily. And for others of us, myself included, it's not something that comes so easy or that we think is fun. But that doesn't still mean that there isn't some value in it. But before you start feeling too overwhelmed by the whole scenario, I do want you to kind of consider the fact that you don't have to track everything at once. It's perfectly fine to say that, you're going to kind of focus in on a few categories and start with that. And then if you get good information and that's helpful, then you can decide, do you want to track more? And so, for example, it's just an example here with Maria, who is a young mom. And rather than trying to track everything, she thinks that the places that will make the most, give her the most data and make the most difference would be to track 4 areas: food, clothing, school supplies, and what they're spending on fun or entertainment. And again, this doesn't have to take a lot of technology. You can easily just take a piece of paper, kind of divide it up, and estimate how much if you were somebody like Maria, for example, how much is Maria spending? And she probably has a figure in her mind for food, clothing, school supplies, and fun. Write that down as her estimate, and then spend the month tracking those 4 areas and keeping the receipts perhaps, or writing it down on a card, or using an app, or using the notes on her phone, whatever works easiest, and just kind of getting a good sense of those areas. Once they're comfortable with that, then moving on to another area if it's helpful. And if it's not, then, that's fine too. All right, so before we finish up and move on to another area, one more poll coming our way here, where I'm just curious, after all this conversation about tracking expenses and income, as a result of this, how likely are you to track your expenses moving forward? I'll give everybody a minute here. Well, not really a whole minute, but a little bit. See where we're coming. Okay, that looks like I've got most everybody. All right, there we go. So some different information for us to take a look at. Thank you very much. All right, so let's say you've been tracking and you've put together this budget, and you know what? It's not quite working, because ultimately what we need is for income to be greater than expenses. So what do we do when the income isn't more than the expenses? Really, we have 2 choices. We can look at increasing income, and we can look at ways to decrease expenses. And both of these have value. So in the chat, perhaps you can put down, what are some of the ideas that you've tried or you've heard of other people trying of ways to increase income? And it's not easy, and I'm not trying to say it is easy. So we're looking at increasing income, not necessarily decreasing spending. So things like second jobs, side jobs, selling things like jewelry, asking for a raise, maybe working more hours if you're getting paid hourly, making art. So again, focusing on income side of things. Side jobs are really kind of where I'm seeing a lot of this. So including things like Uber and others. So, okay, good ways to think about that. Sometimes we can also think about things that are talents that we might have that we could develop, into income. Sometimes we have hobbies that we don't think about as income, but they could be. Things like garage sales are kind of sometimes amazing what you can do with that. So yeah, good ideas in there. If increasing income doesn't seem like the right answer or not going to do enough, then we need to start taking a look at decreasing expenses. And for the conversation of trying to modify a budget or a spending plan, I think it's helpful to think of fixed versus flexible expenses. right? So fixed expenses are typically the same amount each month or during some specific time period, and they often involve a contract. Flexible expenses vary in costs, so they're different at different months. Now, just because it's fixed or flexible, that doesn't tell us if it's a need. So a need is like food, for example. That can be very flexible in that it can be, different amounts spent eating out or at the grocery store. When we're looking at modifying our budget, usually the place to start is with flexible expenses because they're easier to change in the short term. So, for example, if a fixed expense is something like a housing contract or a car payment, those are hard to change. You have a contract, even something like a phone or a cable contract. You may not be able to change that in the short term. And that's maybe a good example of a fixed expense that even if you want to change might cost you more than it's worth changing until that contract runs out. And that's why we suggest looking at flexible, because we have more option in the short term. Now, if you really need a significant amount of money to make things balance out, then yes, you may eventually need to look at those fixed expenses and to change them, but it probably won't be the place you start. Another strategy is to take a, whoops, excuse me, I just went too far. All right, another strategy is to take a look at things that you do that are habits that you do frequently. And sometimes these are very small amounts rather than large amounts, but they can really add up over time. And I think sometimes it's in a surprising amount. So you might even see yourself on here on somewhere. And I think this is one of those things where, again, if we have that dream, that goal in front of us, whether it's to build a savings account, to travel, to buy something new, whatever it is, then it becomes worthwhile to change some of our habits, because then I can say to myself, is it worth it to go have takeout for lunch every 5 days a week? Or would I rather take some of that $2,080 and put it towards my dream? And if I can do that, then it's worth it to me to make my own lunch or find a cheaper version of lunch. And that kind of brings us to another concept, which is really like stepping down costs rather than getting rid of them. So there's a lot of things that we do that have value in terms of it gives us a way to interact with people. It's something that is a treat for ourselves. But maybe we can, rather than cutting it out, we can step down the costs. So rather than having, for example, and my wonderful, like always talking about coffee and cappuccinos, rather than having a cappuccino a day for around $1,600 a year, maybe I cut it down to 2 cappuccinos per week. Or maybe if I really want to make that goal and I need $1,500 to do it, maybe it'd be worth it to me to bring coffee from home. So knowing what's important, knowing what my goals and my values are, will make it more comfortable for me to step down my costs. It's also important to realize when you're out there making these kinds of financial decisions that mental fatigue, and especially related to decision makings like financial decisions, is a real thing. Making decisions can make your brain just plain tired, and then you don't make as good of decisions. You're more likely to act impulsively. You lose your self-control and willpower. And that's why you so often hear people say, don't go to the grocery store when you're hungry and tired, because you're more likely to purchase things that you don't need. The grocery store is one example, but also think about, for example, big purchases like buying a car or buying something like a furniture, or even just being on the internet shopping around at night late. These are times when you're tired, it really can add up. So think about that when you're in the mode of making financial decisions. So we've been going through this different steps to spending plans, and have worked through all these things between knowing what's important to you, knowing your income and expenses, putting that plan together. But then it's also really important to go back and evaluate it. How is it working for you? Do you need to adjust it? So often when I talk to people who say, well, I put together a spending plan or a budget and I tried it for a month and I failed and I quit. And And when they say that, and I always realize they're thinking of it as like you either do it right or you do it wrong. And really think of it more as a working document. It's a document kind of evolving as you learn about yourself and you learn about your financial decision making and what you want to do with your money. And so evaluating it allows you that space to say, this is what I'm happy with. This is what I might need to change. So build that into your plan, please. All right. While we're thinking about financial decision making, remember to balance your short-term and your long-term goals. And that's a whole lot easier to say than to do. So when it comes down to decisions like, do we take a vacation this year or do we save money for retirement? These are tough decisions. It's going to take some thought. It's going to take some communication with your partner to really get in a place where you can feel comfortable about working towards multiple goals. It can happen. In many ways, people you need to be doing this, but I think it's important to really, again, to give yourself that space to dream big and to think about where do you want to be in the short term, but also where do you want to be, down the road a while, and to work towards both of those goals, because that down the road actually shows up pretty fast sometimes. So, time goes by very quickly. So you do want to build that into your planning. I think we've mentioned on some of our other webinars, but I'll mention it again, that Sasha, Kamaya, and I do a podcast called Family Financial Feuds. And our latest one was actually thinking long-term, kids versus retirement. And so you might find that one to be interesting if you're also in that place of trying to think about where to prioritize your dollars in terms of different goals. So when we look at the research that looks at what makes people successful financially, one thing kind of jumps out that you might not think about, and that is comparison shopping. And so it turns out that learning how and taking the time to comparison shop for big purchases, for fees, for services and things can really make a difference, especially as it adds up over time through your life. So you may want to just keep this in mind too, as you're looking for ways to improve your financial well-being. So even as simple of an example of trying to decide where you want to keep your financial accounts and what service is best for you, really makes a difference. So take a look at those things and pay attention to fees as well as you're choosing different services. And just as an example, here is a comparison chart that can be used when looking at comparing different financial accounts, especially in this example, we're looking at ones for college students who might be opening up a checking or a savings account for the first time. One last financial tip coming your way here, and that is remembering when things sound too good to be true, they might be. Just going to share with you that the title that we have on this webinar, Secrets to Financial Success, is kind of like a little con because you don't really know what the topic is until you get on to the webinar, where our other topics are really much more straightforward and kind of tell you about what they're going to be. And interesting enough, we often get more people registered for this one that is not very specific than any others. So that just makes me leave this slide in here to remember that if you are being pressured to buy something, if there's a sense of urgency, like if you don't do it today, you're going to not get this wonderful deal, you might want to really think, is it too good to be true? Especially if somebody tells you it's a secret, don't tell anybody else. Then I always think, why am I the lucky person to get this secret? Maybe there's something odd here. So in our world today, we need to be savvy and a little bit careful when we're starting to be pressured. Another secret to financial success is don't hesitate to ask for help. Keep learning, and congratulations, all of you that have stuck through this webinar. You're prime examples of people who are looking for more information and interested in keep on learning, and that's really wonderful. There's lots of different ways to keep learning: reading, attending webinars, connecting with our Money Mentors program, where we have volunteers who are willing to meet with community members and help them work towards their personal financial goals. So if you're interested in working with a mentor, don't hesitate to reach out to us at the URL that Brooke just put in the chat, and we are available to help people in the counties that are listed on this slide. There are also going to be times where you're going to want to work with a financial professional. There's a lot about finances to know, and we can't know it all. And that's why people spend all day long working in the field. So if you'd like to know more about how to choose a financial professional and to be able to download a free guide that will help you interview people to find a good match for you, then this is a website you might want to check out. Was trying to think of what things are really timely right now that I might tell you about today, and I thought of taxes. So we do have a blog, which I have just posted recently, a post on should I do my own tax preparation, and if I need help, where do I get free help? So you might want to, that's another resource for you that is out there. All right, so let's just do a quick review here on my secrets to financial success. As some of you know, I've been teaching for a while, so I feel confident in saying that these things are all very positive things to be doing. So match your values with your financial decisions. Remember to think about, really seriously consider whether you're willing to track your expenses for that data and your income. Don't forget to comparison shop for big dollar items. Be savvy and be wary. Ask questions and continue to grow your knowledge. And then the one that we haven't really talked about is build a savings habit. But we have a whole webinar coming up with that on that in 2 times from now, so 2 weeks. So I hope you'll be able to join us and learn more about building that savings habit when Maya presents. So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has done a fair amount of research on what affects financial well-being. And the research has really been pretty clear that people with higher financial well-being scores have a confidence in their ability to achieve a financial goal. And that's often because they've tried it and they've done it, so they know they can. They've built up a habit of saving, and they have effective day-to-day money management behaviors like tracking expenses, like knowing where their money goes and where their income comes from, and things related to credit like we've been talking about in the last few weeks. So these are things that we know do help people and do work. So it's tough sometimes, but good job everybody who's working so hard on this right now. So next week, we are going to be talking about framing biases and overcoming hurdles, which is always a really interesting talk that Seisha will be taking the lead on. And again, another perspective on what affects our financial decision making and why do we sometimes hit stumbling blocks. Before we sign off, and I look for more questions that I might have missed in the chat, I just like to put up one more poll here, because it really does help us show who is attending our webinars. This is something that we need to be able to tell our funders, including the federal government, which is one of our sources of funding. So I appreciate everybody who can provide this information. You may need to scroll down to see all the different options. And while that's going on, I will tell you about another resource. We do send out text tips about once a week called Extending Wellness. So if you're interested in getting little wellness tips, feel free to sign up at the URL in the chat. It's actually kind of fun. I get them and I enjoy them quite a bit. And then we would also love feedback from you about this webinar. So we have a URL for that. And we will be able to appreciate all the feedback. We really do look at the feedback people give us. We do use it to get better at what we do. So it doesn't just go into a black hole. This isn't something that's required of us, but we do think that it is helpful to us. It helps us grow. It means a lot. So, all right, I'm going to end that polling. Thank you, everybody, for sharing that information.